My guest today switched from the piano to the guitar, or he switched focus at least around the age of 12. When he was younger, he was fairly militant with his practice routines, but now he practices half as much as he should. At least that's how he puts it himself. When he was 16, he thought Kirk Hammett was the fastest player alive, but John Petrucci taught him wrong. He releases music both as a solo artist and as a member of progressive bands like Tomera, Opinot, Nova Collective, and of course Haken. In Dutch we say Haken.
I've heard that a lot.
Yeah. Where do you find the time, I'm wondering, but I'll ask that later on. Welcome to this episode, Richard Henshall.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you so much. How are you doing?
Very good. Yeah, I had a good sleep last night on the bus. I had my yogurt in the morning, so I feel nice and fresh. Yeah, I feel good.
You're in the middle of a tour. I just said, where do you find time? What intrigues me, you're also giving lessons during this tour. And I figured, this guy must be quite relaxed. Because if you're on tour and you decide, okay, I have time to give some lessons, you must be, right? Is that true?
Yeah, luckily on this tour, we have a bit of free time because we're the only band on this tour. We're playing an evening with format. So we come in to the venue, we have a lot of space backstage. And because a lot of the shows are seated, we're playing in nice venues as well. So we've got rooms like this, which are nice and spacious. So we thought we'd make use of that space and the time. And just to hang out with some of the fans and play some guitar. So it's been fun, yeah.
But still, that says something about you, because some people would say like, I prefer to do nothing then. But that's not you then, maybe?
Not really. I mean, I'm always up super early. I tend to sleep maybe 4 or 5 hours every night if I'm lucky. So I'll be up at like 7 o'clock every day. If I can, I'll go for a jog around the town. Come back and try and do some work, and then there just seems to be infinite hours in the day. So I'm just trying to fill it out with as much as I can do. If I'm away from home, I'll try and maximize the time I can to work if possible. Yeah. So when I'm at home, I can spend time with my family and kind of make up for the time I haven't been there.
You always had that you had hours left over in the day, right? Or
now we spoke about this, I have children now. Time is very tight a lot of the time. So it's all about trying to fit things into small pockets of time.
But when you were young, you also slept just for a couple of hours then?
Yeah. I've always had trouble sleeping. So I think it comes from my mum.
Okay.
Who is borderline insomniac.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so she's always struggled with sleeping.
Oh, it's a struggle then. It's not like, okay, after 4 hours, I'm good to go.
No, it's not like I set my alarm for 2 a.m.
Yeah.
Just so I could get more hours in the day. If I could sleep for 12 hours, I would love to. But my body just says no. And somehow I just seem to get on with it. And it hasn't really hindered me too much. I do get tired by the end of the day. I end up falling asleep on the sofa a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And when I do that, I go up to bed and I'm lying there wide awake.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, which sucks. If that happens, I'll go downstairs, go to my studio and just work on some music. And sometimes be working through the night if I can.
Yeah. So what happens then? Because that's a strange kind of vibe you have then, right? After a little bit of sleep in the night.
Yeah. Sometimes you feel like a zombie in the day. But there are times when you're working at night where you have complete silence and no things like interfering in your brain, where you can be a little bit more creative. So sometimes that's the best time to work.
And you also practice at night or don't you?
Not really. Back in the day, maybe when I was younger, generally I used to practice a lot more. But as I've grown up, time is a lot more restricted now. So I spend most of my time writing music, I'd say, and trying to think of creative ways I can fit practicing into that whole process.
Oh, yeah.
If that makes sense. So incorporating stuff that I'm working on into the songs that I'm writing. For example, I might be working on harmony or chords and learning new voicings. So I'll just try to incorporate that into a song and then maybe work out interesting ways I can pick that chord with my right hand. So I'm kind of working on being creative. I'm working on my harmony knowledge and theory, but also I'm working on my right hand technique, all in the space of a smaller period of time. So I'm just trying to maximize the time, or the shorter time that I have. Whereas when I was younger, I just had infinite hours, it seemed. So I'd sit there, and a lot of the time you end up just meandering and just losing focus when you have too much time sometimes.
But that it seems that using the creative process also to learn skills at the guitar makes it more fun, I suppose, right? How important is that for you to keep it a joyful thing to do?
100%. The way I've approached guitar has evolved so much over the years, and more so as I grow older. The process of writing music has become what I'm really passionate about. I enjoy it so much, going into the studio with nothing, and then kind of leaving with something if I can. Also, it comes, it's a double-sided coin. Sometimes you get depressed when you can't fully realize the idea that you can hear in your head. But I think you just need to be quite loose with the process and realize that it's not always going to flow. Sometimes you'll get some good ideas that come out of the session. Sometimes you won't. But you need to enjoy it. Every time you kind of beat yourself up or get depressed, you just got to realize it's only music. You know, the main thing that drove it in the first place was the enjoyment of playing. So I want to always try and keep that if I can.
Can imagine that, because if you write something while you're a bit stressed, do you hear it in hindsight? Like, oh, that's maybe not the best part I've written?
Yeah. I feel like if you're stressed or you're going through a bad patch, it really does, for me anyway, it hinders the process. I know a lot of artists will say they come out with the best music whilst they're struggling. But for me, I found that I can't think clearly. During COVID, there were a few tough years I had. I had a writer's block. I just couldn't come out of anything that I really was attached to, or that I felt had legs that could kind of grow into anything. For me, I need to be in a good place mentally to be able to be loose and let the ideas flow properly. Yeah.
About the time, I read your father passed away around that time. Is it?
Yeah, it was a tricky time because my father passed away during COVID. So we were already in a restricted period anyway, so we couldn't really see each other much. He passed away suddenly, and it was a bit of a shock to me and my brother and the whole family, really. So that was hard. And during that time, I gave birth to my youngest son as well, who has Down syndrome. So that was a big learning curve for us and a big shock. And over the years, we've kind of really embraced that, and it's opened up our horizons in so many ways. But as it was all happening, it all happened at the same time. So it was a really intense time. So I just couldn't get into the studio and be creative, and there's too much flowing around in my brain. But now we're coming out the other side of that, and the juices are flowing again.
What helped you in that period to get over, or was it just time also maybe?
I think time helps you heal. Being open, spending time with your family as much as possible. And in the case of my son, I'm very lucky because I live in London, and there's loads of support groups around. People that have been through the same things that I have, and my wife has. We joined a bunch of groups, and we just talked through it, and then they gave us the realization that it's actually fine, it's just different. And when we were given the diagnosis or the information that our son had Down syndrome, the guy said, "You already have another son. They're both going to be climbing to the top of a mountain. They're just going to be taking a different route. They'll make it, but maybe Asher will take a bit longer to get there, but they'll both make it to the top." So I was like, that's a really nice analogy. And I've kind of taken that with me. And I always think about that when I'm thinking of the struggles that we go through whilst bringing Asher up. And also I took up running during that time. I always liked to jog. It was always something that, I did as a hobby, I guess, just loosely as a pastime. But when Asher was born, I just felt this urge to get more headspace on it. She needs to process the information. So by running every day, it just gave me that space to really think about things away from everything. And I ended up doing a couple of marathons and raising money for the charities that helped us, which was a very fulfilling experience for me. And hopefully I'll do more in the future. But it's also a good way to keep fit. So it's not bad.
Yeah, because becoming a parent, of course, does something with your focus, right? All of a sudden, it's not me at number one, but still, it's also interesting because there's so much going on, which is a nice base for making music too, right? Because music is all about experience you draw from life, right?
Yeah.
So what did that mean for your daily routine, so to say? Like, okay, you run, but how did you find your time to just sit down and like make music in a relaxed way again?
I just took a bit of time away from it because we were in COVID.
Yeah.
And COVID happened, or at least started, when we were on a tour with Devin Townsend. So we were right in the middle of that tour. We weren't fully aware of how serious it was. And we'd heard, stories of a virus starting in China. But we never thought it would spread across the world like it did. And suddenly, overnight, things just escalated, and we were in America at the time. Donald Trump gave a speech saying everyone needs to leave the country. There's no flights coming in, no flights coming out. We're like, whoa, like, we're in America. We better get home. And the tour got cancelled the next day. We went home, and we were just stuck at home for 2 years, basically. So the whole music industry stopped. So we had loads of time, and in an ideal world, that'd be the perfect time to write music. But all of these other things were happening in my life at that time that kind of prevented that.
Yeah.
So I just spent time with my family and just enjoyed having that time together. And it was quite a fun time. Even it's quite tragic circumstances. People were dying around the world during COVID, but it was a very unique experience. Really,
the world a little bit smaller also, right?
It did, yeah. We're just confined to rooms.
And if you have young kids, that's I experienced myself. It's a good thing. You don't have to worry about, I want to see this show or I want to go there, or
exactly.
Just back to basic,
it
right?
Simplifies things. And it was fun because my eldest son was around about 5 at that time, and he was like either reception or year 1. And we had to homeschool him for a few months because schools were closed down. And that was really fun. So we turned our house into a kind of school almost. We were doing lots of fun activities, being creative, building things. I really enjoyed that because that's precious time that you don't really often get as a father, because a lot of their learning happened at school.
Yeah.
And you can help them with that at home, but you don't always get that precious time. So I really embraced it as much as I could. It was a crazy time when you think about it. I mean, it's probably never going to happen again. You never know.
Don't say that aloud.
Oh, touch wood.
Yeah.
There's lots of wood around me, so
it sounds horrible on the podcast if you're gonna knock it. Hey, because I want to go back to your early days as a guitarist. Because you just mentioned Devin Townsend, I want to quickly talk about him because we are both have gray beards.
Oh man,
we're both in our 40s, but we have another thing in common. Teria of Devin Townsend. I'm curious. What do you like so much about that album?
It's a great album. I know, at least I think, he's not the hugest fan of this album from what I've heard. Which is quite interesting because for me, it's one of those special albums that really kind of spurred me on to want to create music. I loved how dense the arrangements were. It feels like there's just piles and piles of sounds which aren't necessarily even instruments. It's just a lot of sound design going on. There's even dogs barking and stuff that you can hear in the distance, which gives this otherworldly feeling when you're listening to the music.
But it's still also very crisp, right? I mean, some of the guitar sound so clear.
Yeah.
Right?
So chunky.
Yeah.
It's a great guitar tone that he's created there. But if you look at the booklet of the album, it's got these crazy landscapes which don't feel like they're on Earth.
Yeah.
And like for me, that's how the music feels. It feels like it's this otherworldly thing, which really encapsulated me. I love that album, but it's a shame he doesn't play some of the songs so much live. But he's one of the greats. And like we were lucky enough.
He is invited also in this show if he ever gets time.
Well, I hope you get to meet him. He's a lovely, really lovely guy.
I've met him way back, but I think he's in a different phase in his life now. So I'm curious to meet him again, maybe.
Fair enough, because we did the US tour that I spoke about that got cut short, but we also did a whole Europe tour together as well. So it was amazing seeing the master in action every night. Yeah.
Okay. But talking about masters. You're one yourself.
Well, can't see any.
No, it's not the closet behind you. But okay, you're in your early teens. Your mother is a piano teacher, right?
Yeah.
And you play piano yourself. Still do. So what? In what way did the guitar grab your attention? What made you decide? I want that too.
Well, I feel lucky that my mum was a piano teacher. So she was also a teacher in schools as well as a music teacher. But she used to teach at the weekends. So I'd wake up in the mornings to the sound of people being taught downstairs. And that really got the juices flowing in my brain. And I guess on a subconscious level, that's where the journey started for me. But then I also had a guitar just lying around. Maybe my dad planted it there, I don't know. But it was just in the corner, and it was an acoustic guitar. And I used to...
Followed you around.
Yeah. I was like, why is it in every room? That's weird. Yeah. So eventually I ended up picking up the guitar and just strumming around. Nothing serious. Back then, I would have been into indie rock bands like Ocean Colour Scene and Radiohead and all of these guys. And I used to just strum songs, simple songs. And that's where my guitar journey started, really. I ended up forming kind of like a Radiohead tribute band at high school. We used to play songs from OK Computer and The Bend and Pablo Honey, as well as some other stuff as well. And I was playing bass, actually, in that band. Yeah. Okay. But whilst that was happening...
Why? Was there already another guitar player and he's like, was it A choice for you or B choice?
Weirdly, it was, it wasn't really not something I would naturally gravitate towards, but there was already a guitarist in the band. So I was like, I want to play music. I want to kind of hang out with other people and we're all friends. Tell you what, I'll play bass because no one else wants to play it. So I'll do it. And Ross, the singer in Haken, he was also in the band singing. No, sorry, he was playing guitar.
Oh,
so there were two guitars. We had a lead guitarist and Ross was playing rhythm guitar. And I said, I'll play bass. I want to join in. It sounds fun. And then we evolved into covering songs from bands like Deftones. And then we gradually got heavier and heavier.
And faster.
Yeah, faster and faster. And then eventually we, years later, formed Haken and started that whole process. But I think during that time, my music tastes were changing and I was naturally hearing stuff that my father was listening to. And he was heavily into Pink Floyd. So me and my brother have got this tattoo to remember him.
Oh, wow.
My only tattoo. But Pink Floyd were his favorite band by a long stretch. So he lived and breathed Pink Floyd. So that's all I ever remember. Dire Straits as well, Queen, Yes, King Crimson, all of these bands. He would listen to those guys and that really rubbed off on me a lot. And then naturally I just kind of went down that route. And whilst that was happening, my mum was listening to more jazz influenced music. So that gave me a different dimension to my influences.
So I mentioned in the beginning, first you thought Kirk Hammett is the fastest, best player in the world. He is great. But then can you tell me something about that process of finding out like, oh man, there maybe are no limits on the guitar. And then because then you hear John Petrucci, you raised the bar.
Yeah, I remember.
And still it's great, right? But how did that feel? What did that do to you as a person, but also as a musician?
I remember it vividly, actually. So I went to a gig or a nightclub. I can't remember. It's like maybe we used to go to this metal nightclub in London every Saturday. Maybe it was there. And there was this guy who used to hand out flyers outside the venue called Hardcore Will. And he was at every gig, at every club, just handing out flyers for the next club or the next gig. And we got talking about Metallica and just music and guitar music in general. And he said, you've got to check out Dream Theater. If you play guitar and you like metal music, check out Dream Theater. And like you say, by that point, Kirk Hammett was like God to me. He was like insane guitarist that had superhuman skills. So I was like, okay, there's someone who's faster than that? Surely not. That's not possible. So the next day I went out and the first album that I saw in HMV, which no longer exists, unfortunately, was Awake. So I bought Awake and I called up Ross and Matt Marshall, who was the old Haken guitarist, and we started the band together. And I said, come round. I've got this new album by this band called Dream Theater. Let's listen to it. And we sat down in my bedroom and we just listened to the whole album together. Yeah.
And you didn't hear it before?
No.
You just waited until they were there?
Yeah, I was like, come over, because we loved listening to music. We jammed together a lot. And we had the idea of the band at that point. And like this was a real turning point for us. We heard this album. I just vividly remember hearing Erotomania. Thinking this is like unbelievable. Surely is that a guitar?
I could go until there. And
yeah, I mean that's a great riff.
Yes, yeah.
Like, what's going on here? What is that time signature? And then it got to the solo, and I just couldn't believe it was real. So I checked live videos, and he's playing it live. So this is unbelievable, unheard of. And then that was a real catalyst for starting Haken. In a way, I love the fact that they could make such a huge, majestic sound with just 5 guys. It just sounded so orchestral and vast in its approach, and I was like, that is something I really want to do. And that's what got the cogs turning, I guess, in my brain. And
did you then also decide, like, or not decide, or maybe want to become really good? Like,
oh yeah. So it was around that time I just started to increase my practice. I became like very regimented with it, and I would try and block out periods of time. So say I was practicing for 6 hours in a day, I would be pretty regimented about it and say I've got 30 minutes on alternate picking, 30 minutes on legato, which in hindsight, maybe it's a bit too mechanical a way to approach it. That's evolved a lot over the years. But I would always try and make it musical at the end of the session by incorporating it into some kind of improvisation or a writing session at the end, so I could put some of the stuff that I worked on into actual musical practice, which is really important. Because there's no point being the most incredibly technical player if you can't really apply it in a musical way. And then over the years, that's become my focus, like being musical, and just less and less I'm bothered about technique, I guess.
But can you tell me something about that realization? Like, okay, there's me as a skilled guitar player, and now I can play at 120 beats, and now I can do the same riff at 130 and 140, which is, in a way, it must feel cool, right? And you achieve something, so to say. But can you tell me something about the realization of, like, okay, now I want to go back to just making music again?
So there's 2 points. Firstly, I never quite reached the level I wanted to reach, because maybe genetics, DNA, who knows? Maybe there's like this invisible barrier that stops you from becoming this elite samurai on the guitar. And I think I came to realize that there wasn't much emotional impact in that approach, and I couldn't really convey feelings or emotions with that approach. So it became more about writing emotive music. The older I grew, and I guess I came to understand what my feelings and emotions were, and I wanted to kind of project that into the music. And I was like, well, the technique is great, and it's a means to an end. Sometimes you want to increase the intensity of a song. And if you've got the means to do that, that's really good. So it just increases your palette or your potential to create certain feelings. But the true emotion usually comes from somewhere else. It's like in there. And that no matter what technique you can get, that's not really going to change that. And I think that comes from just living life and like, you know, just experiencing things and traveling, you know, meeting people, socializing with friends, seeing your family. All these things kind of build up a feeling inside you that you can then project. And sitting in your bedroom for 12 hours a day probably isn't going to increase that or give you a better chance of doing that.
And has that become easier to translate that feeling into music for you throughout the years?
Yeah, one thing I've tried to do, I've tried to hone my writing almost like a technical exercise. So back in the day, I'd be quite militant with the technical stuff, but sometimes I'll set myself challenges and restrict myself just for fun. So I'll say I'll have 1 hour. I want to write a song in 1 hour just using 2 chords. I want to see if I can take those 2 chords and think of interesting ways to create lots of other sections from it. So I could maybe play the chords in the root positions. Then I could maybe play them in their inversions, and that could be another section. I could build a riff from the chords. Stuff like that. It's quite a fun way to approach writing, and it means you're thinking outside of the box. And
this relates to Reinier Baas, Dutch jazz player who was a guest here as well, and he told about how restrictions help him.
Yeah.
Also, he made compositions of 1 minute. Sometimes on one string.
Yeah.
As a bass, so to say, and like that way he said, the same kind of approach, right?
That's very similar, because I feel like there's a skill in trying to bleed as much from one idea, and that's quite hard.
Yeah.
But I feel that if you can do that effectively, the song has a certain flow or continuity to it, which most of the great songs have. Like they have a feeling or a mood. When you listen to it, it's like you're entering this little world or universe that the song is. And usually it's because there's this key idea that they've managed to keep consistent, even if it's like on a subconscious level. You might not even realize it as a listener, but there's something that's tying all the sections together, rather than just stitching different ideas together, which sometimes you can hear that. And you hear songs, you can hear that they've written a chorus. 2 years later, they've written a riff, and they just stitched all these different ideas together. Those kind of songs don't necessarily flow as well. And there's like a lack of continuity. So more and more so over the years, I've tried to, I'm not perfect at this at all. It's something I'm trying to learn as a writer, but trying to kind of get it in a short period of time. So I'll go into the studio and I'll try and capture whatever feeling or emotion I have into this one song, maybe in a day. And I'll try and like create a rough draft of the song, and then come back and fill in the gaps later.
But there's one thing doing that as a solo artist, and also doing that in a band, right? How you deal with that when you say there has to be some consistency, that feeling, how do you do that when you enter the rehearsal space, so to say? Like, how do you communicate that with your fellow band members?
Yeah, luckily we all have an affinity when it comes to, actually that's the title of one of our albums. When it comes to music, we all have a common ground, and the progressive world is that common ground, but we all bring a lot of other influences to the table. So we have a lot of approaches when we write as a band. We, in the past, we've maybe met up in pockets. So 2 or 3 of us will meet, and then we'll kind of work on a draft together. Sometimes it's just one person will draft the whole song. Like in the early days, I used to do that. So I'll draft the whole project really, and then send it to the guys. And then when we got to the album Affinity, we started to work together and collaborate, and it became a fully immersive experience for all of us. But working in different ways, I think, helps.
Yeah.
And on the latest album, which we've just started working on, we decided to fully embrace this idea, and we booked out a space, and we just got together and did it in a fairly small period of time.
Yeah.
And that was a real fun process because we were all on the same page, and all of the ideas that we were coming out with were generated together as a band. So it felt like a fully collaborative experience. So yeah, there's no right or wrong approach really, and it doesn't always stay the same. But working as a solo artist it has its challenges as well, I would say.
Who's your mirror when you're writing as a solo artist?
That's the problem. There's
just you.
Yeah, because you're stuck in your own little world. And then sometimes you overwork things to the point where you dislike them. And that is a real hindrance, which also plays into that idea I was talking about earlier about compressing it into a short period of time. So it's fresh. So when you go back the next day, you're like, I quite like this idea. But if you work on the same idea for 2 or 3 months, very quickly you're going to start disliking the idea. So, I imagine a struggle for a lot of musicians that write music. So it's something I'm always working on. I'm always looking for ways to be more efficient if I can. But I'll often play it to my wife.
Oh, yeah.
She's not a musician, but she loves music. And that's quite an objective viewpoint. And I really take her feedback on board because
what did she say about your latest solo? It's an EP album.
She really helped with it because she thinks she's an artist, so she thinks of things in a different way. She sees things in like colors, and she's thinking about the emotion.
Oh yeah.
And I've got this song that's coming out called Black Rain, which is it's kind of like it's instrumental, so it's on the next set of EPs. But she was like, this next section needs to sound like thunder. I was like, I didn't really think of that like that at all. So I had that in my head. So I was trying to create that feeling of thunder erupting. And as a result, the section became heavier and darker. So I felt like that was really useful, having that input. But sometimes you don't have that when you're working on your own, and you just go in circles.
But your latest solo EP, man, I really love it. It pulled me right in and didn't let go, man. So either your wife gave really good input, or or all credits to you, man.
Thank you so much. I mean, these ideas actually came about during COVID.
Oh yeah,
and I started working on them, and then all of that crap happened, and then so I just put them to one side and just didn't do anything for a while. And then I've revisited them more recently. In fact, the first idea came on the way home from that tour that I was talking about. I was sitting on the plane and I had my laptop, and I just like heard this groove, dun, 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 dun. And I kind of liked the way it was syncopated against that straight 4 pulse. Then I came home, and then I just scratched out a rough demo of that, and that's where it started.
It's interesting that because Pliny was a guest as well, and in some ways your solo music reminds me of the way he approaches music too. That's a very simple tune you're singing, right? And how it can start so small, and you basically build a whole building, right? That's great.
I love the idea of having simple ideas that flow through the song, and then adding intricacies around that simple idea. I feel like it's a lot easier to grasp as a listener, and also it's more relatable. And the music I listen to is like that. So I want to kind of reflect what I'm into. I listen to lots of like indie stuff, like Bon Iver, simple music, jazz, ambient stuff, electronic stuff. and not so much progressive metal, weirdly. But
Not
so yeah,
anymore.
no, and so I wanted to reflect the stuff I was into, and a lot of it is simple. I noticed that I gravitated towards stuff that you can kind of nod your head to and groove to, and then, but I also love that feeling of being slightly off kilter, where it's not quite right. You feel slightly off, slightly uneasy, but you can also still groove to it. Groups like Sungazer.
Oh, yes.
I love the way they approach rhythm. It's all in 4 a lot of the time, but they have odd tuplets within those beats. So it feels slightly drunk, the way they describe it. They have a song
Maybe they were. No, probably not.
Yeah, and that comes from some of the hip hop drummers from back in the day, where they're kind of just sitting on the groove a bit, and it's slightly off the grid. So I've tried to embrace that kind of
Does
writing.
that keep you focused? Maybe that because it's just off, that in some way it pulls your attention, right? That's strange how that works.
Yeah. It's really, I love that uneasy feeling.
Yeah.
And I'm lucky enough to play with some great drummers over the years. And on these EPs, Lang is, he's just incredible. He's primarily, I guess, a jazz drummer. But he also plays a lot of heavy stuff as well. So he was the perfect fit, but he's very, very loose in his approach. So I'll give him a project and, I'll just say, kind of do what you want, really. I've programmed like a rough map or blueprint of how I'd roughly like it to sound, but then he'll often come back with his own thing. And that really adds a whole another dimension to the music, which, I think is really important. When it comes to having live musicians playing the music, I really want them to have their say and their voice within the music.
About drummers, you play with Mike Portnoy as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, that was an experience.
Yeah.
As I mentioned before, like Dream Theater were one of the bands that really inspired me as a teenager. And they still do. I mean, even yesterday we were watching live videos in our bus.
Oh, yeah.
Just like, wow, what a band.
Yeah.
They're just, there's no one like them that have reached that level of proficiency.
Yeah.
And also the fact that they're playing to such like incredible audiences, and it's mind blowing. It's really inspirational. But for me, Scenes from Memory is one of my favorite albums of all time. And we were lucky enough to play a big chunk of that album with Mike on a bunch of shows around the world. And it really was a special time in my career. I'll never forget it. And I'm very thankful for Mike for taking us on the road with him. Yeah, he's a great guy.
I have basically 2 more questions. You mentioned in the next set of EPs. So what's going to be released as Richard Henshall solo?
Yeah, so I set out to, this was constantly changing. At first I was going to release an album, and then I thought, actually, I've got to do lots of touring, so I don't think I'm ever going to finish an album in time. So I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll release an EP, and I'll break it into 3 EPs. So I'm going to release 3 separate EPs, and then after that, so they're all under the Mew heading, and they're all going to be instrumental. And after that, I'm going to revisit the Cocoon
Bonus
stuff.
question.
Yeah.
Why instrumental? Like, I really like that, by the way. But
yeah,
but
I
why?
feel like you maybe have a bit more freedom to be fully expressive on your instrument, because music with vocals generally has lyrics that guide you in a certain way, and they're almost not telling you or dictating, but they're helping the listener feel a certain way. Whereas instrumental music, you don't have the lyrics or the storytelling or the narrative involved. So you maybe have to work a little bit harder to convey the emotion. And it has been
maybe easier, right? I mean,
yeah, I've really enjoyed the process. It's been different. Although I did work on an album with Dan Briggs and Pete Jones from Haken, called Nova Collective. Sorry, the band was called the Nova Collective, and the album was The Further Side, and that was instrumental as well, but it was more jazz fusion. That was a lot of fun. That was a while ago, but this is a very different thing. I guess it's driven by the rhythm and the emotional content as well. But yeah, it's been a real fun process, and like I say, a lot of it's been driven by that rhythm. So I'll find a cool groove, like I mentioned earlier on the plane. Something like that will be the catalyst for the song. And then I'm trying to superimpose some kind of emotion on top of the rhythm. But I love that feeling of entering your own little world, just going into the studio and having all this freedom to do what you want. But at the same time, it can be a bit tricky because it could go in infinite directions, and that's part of the struggle, I guess, as a writer.
Yeah, it's finding. You have to find the path that feels good, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But to find that path, you sometimes need to go through hundreds of other paths
that don't feel good, or
yeah, exactly. Like, that feels okay, but maybe the next one's going to feel better. And at some point, you just need to have a deadline or some kind of voice in your head that just says it will probably never be perfect. It's that you can't quite reach perfection, so you just got to be happy. It's got to make you feel good.
Previous guest Pablo van der Poel, Dutch player, we talked about perfect music, and we both agreed that sounds horrible anyway. Perfect music, right? So
it doesn't exist. I mean, it's so hard. I mean, and also your tastes are always changing. So I might have a song that I think is perfect right now. I really love it. But in 10 years' time, I listen back. I was like, what was I thinking? That is not what I would write now. Yeah. So maybe you've got to embrace where you are at that point and just go with it. Yeah. And then just be pretty militant with it and say, I need to move on. I've got to move on to the next idea. Otherwise, I'm never going to release anything. Nothing will ever come out of me.
Hey, final question. I'm gonna after we finish this recording, I'm gonna take a guitar lesson from you.
Oh, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too, because it's gonna be the first face-to-face lesson I had in 25 years, man. So
it's gonna be fun.
I'm curious. Maybe it's worth sharing this as well. How do you approach teaching? Can you roughly say something about that?
So typically I will ask whoever's having the lesson what they want to work on. And maybe like 95% of the time they will want to talk about composition and the way that I will go about writing music or a song. So I will kind of focus it around what they want, really. And it depends from pupil to pupil. I feel like you can probably get more as a pupil from that, like learning the tools that you can use to help you progress as a writer or a guitarist, rather than just learning a riff or learning a song. I feel like that's okay, but you could probably do that by just looking at some tablature on a sheet of paper or online. But it's more about understanding why it has a certain feeling to it, or why that makes you feel a certain way.
I'll come well prepared because I have some first-hand info.
Nice. Yeah.
From you.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to it. I mean, it's been real fun, and I just love hanging out with the fans, and everyone's had their own journey. I'll often like come up against a pupil who's technically better than me. And sometimes
not me.
No, I mean, maybe he will be. And it's great. Sometimes I can learn from that process as well.
Can you share maybe one thing that you thought, I learned this from a pupil?
Yeah, I'm trying to think now. Well, one, I haven't had this lesson yet, but I did a solo competition for my song Granular from the Mew Volume 1. And we had some incredible entries to the competition. But the winner is a guy called Shane Golden. And his solo was absolutely insane. He was basically playing jazz chords, like reharmonizing the whole solo over the top of I've never heard anything like it. And it completely blew me away. The fact that he was thinking about this section in a whole different way to like any of the other solos and my solo as well. So one of the prizes was to give Shane a lesson. So
you asked him to reverse it?
Well, yeah. So we haven't met yet. So after this tour, we'll have the lesson. But I feel like he'll probably end up giving me the lesson. So I really want to pick his brains and see how he clearly thinks differently about a guitar. So yeah. So I haven't had the lesson yet with him. But there's been a number of cases where I'm like, wow, you're really, really good at the guitar. And I feel like sometimes I don't have the skills to kind of show you anything. But then a lot of the times in those situations, they want to know about the experiences or like, how do you go about recording or how do you form a band or how do you balance work and life at home? Stuff like that, which I feel like I can help them with. So it's not always about technique.
I have some questions about some choices of notes, but that's for later on.
I'm looking forward to that.
Hey, for now, thanks so much for your time, Richard Henshall.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Mine too, and listeners, thanks for listening.